Well, hello, friends. Welcome back to the Surfer's Library. I'm Billy Jack, your guide through the pages of surf history, culture, and legend. Today, in our continued tribute to women surfers and an appreciation of Women's History Month, I'll be reading Chapter 23 of Jim Kempton's book, Women on Waves, A Cultural History of Surfing, from ancient goddesses and Hawaiian queens to Malibu movie stars and millennial champions. It's titled The Resurgence of Glide. Last episode, we explored the pioneering women surfers of the 1950s and 60s, those who helped establish a place in the lineup during a transformative time in surfing. Now we fast forward into the 1980s and 90s, where women continued carving out a path in the competitive, male-dominated sport. Through the shortboard revolution and in the early days of the professional tour, they weren't just participating, they were progressing the sport right alongside the men. But this chapter offers a little different perspective on progress. It reminds us that surfing isn't only about pushing harder, faster, or being more aggressive. Sometimes progress looks like returning to something deeper: style, flow, connection to the wave. This chapter is a story about beauty and motion, about grace and rhythm, and about how women surfers help bring longboarding and the art of the glide back into the spotlight. Let's paddle out. The Resurgence of Glide, a longboard revival offered attractive alternatives of artistry and grace. 1982 to 1999. I am constantly amazed at how courageous and radical speaking the truth is. Melissa Etheridge, singer, songwriter, activist. Women's elegant style and infectious camaraderie elevated a 80s longboard renaissance. The late 60s shortboard development was a genuine revolution. The adoption was swift and universal. Across the globe, shapers and surfboard manufacturers responded to the overwhelming new demand, dropping virtually all production of longer equipment. The consequences were numerous. Boards over 7 foot 10 inches became obsolete. The old longboard culture, with its emphasis on footwork, glide, and elegant poses, was replaced by the quest for maneuverability, tight pocket positioning, and vertical rather than horizontal trajectories on the wave face. Riding inside the tube replaced riding the nose as the most radical performance maneuver. A new culture sprang up, in sync with, and sometimes at the forefront of, the global youth movement of music, dress, and worldview, more idealistic but simultaneously often more dogmatic. Many older surfers dropped out. Many Vietnam veterans returning from war found the extreme drop in size and attitude as well too difficult an adjustment. For beginners, learning was much more difficult on tiny equipment. But the rise of the baby boomers and the subsequent surge in wave riding's popularity easily replaced the attrition rate of surfing's first modern generation. These factors, coupled with the development of the leash and improved wetsuits, made surfing far more crowded and considerably less friendly. Nowhere was the effect more pronounced than for the women. Hostility in a more crowded lineup, aggressive competition for waves, and the physical power requirements of shortboard surfing shifted the atmosphere toward a masculine environment, neither best suited nor welcoming to women. Within the few short years from 1967 to 1969, the nearly total disappearance of longboards resulted in a visible reduction to an already scarce female minority in the water. The shortboard's absolute supremacy in equipment choice predominated for more than a decade, from the late 60s to the end of the 70s. Walking on sunshine. The Renaissance began as a whisper in the early 80s. By mid-decade, modest numbers of iconoclasts in Hawaii and the U.S. mainland chose a return to longboards. A marked alternative to the status quo, this small band of revivalists ferreted out single-fin, 9-foot wave riding relics at garage sales or in dusty rafters. It was the only means of acquiring these longer models that had been unfashionable for over a decade. Clark Foam, still the dominating blank manufacturer of the day, was producing no blanks big enough for shapers to even make a longboard. Like Walking on Sunshine, the euphoric upbeat 1985 hit by Katrina and the Waves, longboarding's attraction for women was immediate and irresistible. I hadn't ridden anything but shortboards for 15 years, recalls Sherry Krumer, a veteran competitor and photographic chronicler since the early 60s. The moment I entered a longboard competition, I remembered what I was missing for so long in surfing. Trendiness was superfluous. The elegance of glide, the nuances of trim positioning, and the smooth transitions, synonymous with longboarding in the 60s golden era, enticed surfers to enthusiastically adopt neoclassical equipment. Most regions that embraced the new longboard pulse had sustained a deep and lasting traditional surf culture, established long before the onset of its dark ages, 1969 to 1985. Foremost was the south shore of Oahu, which had maintained an almost religious longboard art form since the time of 100-pound koa wood blanks. And the generally softer rolling waves of the South Shore were far more conducive to longer board lengths. In the previous decade, young talent like Rel and Martha Sun from the west side of Oahu began to remind Hawaiians of their deep roots in the lengthier genre. Nancy Emerson, considered by many to be one of the preeminent talents of her time, returned to longboarding. Already a seasoned shortboard pro and established surf school developer, Emerson decided to start the Hawaiian Longboard Series. Met with immediate support, it gave disparate enthusiasts a gathering place to celebrate tradition. Anna Moody, a Kihei Maui local, was a perfect example of the talent that surfed with Lopez-style grace. San Onofre, the southernmost tip of Orange County, California, had also maintained a Hawaiian-esque surf culture since the 30s. Like Waikiki, the long, slow-rolling waves at Sano were usually the prescribed preference for classic longboards. Access to San Onofre was for many years limited to members of the elite San Onofre Surf Club, where a very colorful but relaxed lifestyle had evolved. Little changed as the beach became public in the 70s, and surfers were already well-versed in the benefits of traditional longboards. But by the 80s, surfers like Nancy Dusler and Pauline Lutton, women from the first families of San Onofre, where much of the early California surf culture had emanated, were nearing the end of their active surf careers. It was a moment when a second generation of classicists emerged, setting off a significant revitalization. Karen Williams, whose father was a legendary board rider and San Onofre fixture, was one of the first women to reintroduce longboards. Lori Craig, Jean Vetter, and Diane Chapt were notable standouts from prominent families as well. Wendy Irwin, another daughter of first-generation California surfers, was becoming an outstanding competitor and beach advocate. Her mother, Liz Irwin, was one of the matriarchs from the classic founders period of the San Onofre Surf Club. Liz had been an elegant longboarder, and like many others, Wendy had returned from shortboarding. Nearly all of the women who reverted to the longer lengths were in fact surfers whose parents and even grandparents had ridden classic 9-foot-plus shapes themselves. Lisa Peterson, Lori Roth, Jamie Gee, and the Beckett sisters were all part of longtime San Onofre families from the 50s whose parents were iconic figures in the Southern California surf culture. Malibu, too, was again home to a crew of girls styling on traditional logs, as the shortboard generation dismissively called them. Brittany Leonard and Carla Rowland were among those leading the resurgence, choosing heavily glassed, leashless single-fin equipment. Shy and sometimes quirky, Leonard was an independent-thinking blonde known for her elegant footwork. Her sister Courtney, by contrast, was dark-haired and talkative. Rowland, who would later go on to become the head instructor at the Surf Institute, remembered enduring years of battling to hold my ground and earn my right in the testosterone-filled lineup. Being a woman, I was not just discriminated against, but also required to prove myself on a regular basis. As Rowland described it, there were rock wars, wrestling matches, I was pantsed in front of crowds, called names, lied about, snaked on waves. I was even told my place in the hierarchy that possessed the point was on the same level as the Grom's kids. It was never easy for women in the water, but the reintroduction of longboards intensified the conflict. Deep-seated resentment festered within a 70s generation struggling with increasingly crowded lineups. Despite the resistance, increasing board length was out of the bag and nothing could stuff it back in. It was too late to reverse course, switch artist Sherry Krumer declared. Even Baja regulars could be seen riding the tip at the peninsula's classic point breaks on small days between swells. Hordes of SoCal and East Coast surfers began surfacing at Saturday garage sales in search of pristine $50 treasures. The infectious enthusiasm even spawned a short resurrection of surf music and classic surf movies. As interest grew, dedicated aficionados began to penetrate the conformity entrenched by a decade of shortboard domination, and women were a major faction of the vanguard. San Onofre, by now in full-length bloom, saw women like Julie Whittigan and Sherry Krumer, who had previously been shortboard competitors, move to the longer lengths with even more contest success. Together again. By the early 90s, there was a bona fide, well-entrenched scene, exuding camaraderie like Janet Jackson's Ode to Sisterhood, Together Again. It was reflected in surfers like Diane Sanders, who had broken into the crowded third point at Malibu, eventually becoming the LA Women's Champ. Her life was cut short in 2009 by a rare form of breast cancer, but not before inspiring a generation of upcoming women. She always had her eye out for female longboarders, especially those of us who grew up competing at coalition contests in the early 90s, proclaimed Corey Schumacher, one of longboarding's most articulate representatives. Diane rallied behind women's longboarding at every opportunity and was an integral part of where we are today. On smaller days, the frequently uncrowded inside cove sections at Cardiff and Swami's to the south, Rincon and Steamers Lane to the north, would see women like Jane the Lane McKenzie from Santa Cruz, Santa Barbara's Simone Redingis, and Jeanette Prince in Encinitas, displaying the kind of feminine grace that was immediately attractive to other women in the lineup. Nearby in San Diego's North County, Prince's daughter Corey Schumacher, who had been surfing all her life on longboards and shortboards alike, was the standout young girl at Cardiff Reef. Gifted with both natural athleticism and an exceptional intellect, she was soon to become a much more prominent figure in the surfing culture. These enthusiastic members of the longboard reawakening often enjoyed the shunned sections of reefs and points by themselves, contemporary shortboards of the time being unsuited to small point wave conditions. In Australia, Sandy Carlton won 10 Australian national longboard titles back-to-back along the cobbled points of the Sunshine Coast. Colleen Dean and Julie Moxie were among those rediscovering broken heads, Noosa, and crescent heads, revered for their longboard qualities that were now returning to vogue. Jeannie Shanks from New Zealand connected with the women from California and Hawaii, a bond that continued for decades. On America's eastern seaboard, a similar scenario was unfolding. Floridian Lisa Moore Wakely, returning from a decade in Hawaii, was once again a Pensacola standout. Mimi Monroe, a child prodigy in the 60s, returned to the scene as well. "It was like they saved a spot in the lineup for me all those years," she said. In New Jersey, Marianne Hayes and surfer-musician Sandy Smedley re-examined their earlier roots. In Hawaii, the scene was customarily low-key, but the performances could often be impressive. Kristen Cole dazzled the North Shore. Waikiki Beach girls Pinoy Makalena and Lori Saxman were standouts in Honolulu, while Desiree DeSoto and Martha Sun continued to perform exceptionally at Makaha. Sun, DeSoto, and Makalena, all from storied Hawaiian surf families, would go on to become mentors to young surfers for years to come. In every region, good surfers had their favorite surf spot. In California, Jen Smith, a very young Wind and Sea Club member, took to the La Jolla Reefs, while Mary Bagalso preferred Oceanside's peaks. Jill Nakano, who later became a successful surf instructor, started at Tourmaline Surf Park, but became a regular at Bolsa Chica and the Cliffs after transplanting to Huntington. Kelly Sloan, a member of the U.S. surf team in the 90s, drove out from Inland Vista to excel at the outside jetties, a consistent semifinals performer. Top trim expert Debbie Troutman loved the lines at Rincon, while Melvis Morris, who had mentored many of the younger upcomers, adopted Seaside Reef as her own. For this burgeoning breed of new longboarders, acceptance in the lineup would be a few years off, Disdain for riding equipment considered archaic often triggered ridicule and, in some cases, outright contempt. But the capacity for longboarders to pick off every good set wave from the outside was really the unstated but more worrisome threat. For women, one positive outcome became apparent. As surfing's populace reaffiliated with the lost art form, a large cadre found it an attractive alternative, incorporating a return to style and grace that many had been longing for. Longboards expanded competition opportunities for women, too. The United States Surfing Federation included a women's longboard division. The Coalition of Surfing Clubs, a revival in itself, hosted contests up and down the coast of California. Mary Schwinn was the Malibu Club kingpin, while Maka Pua'a proudly represented the Maui contingency. Schwinn became the vice president of the Malibu Board Riders Association. Mary dominated first and second point Malibu in the late 90s and early 2000s, remembered Jeanette Prince. The Roxy brand, enjoying a reign in women's beachwear, held just for fun events at San Onofre, directed by surf culture impresario Alan Seymour. Together, Roxy and Seymour lit a flame for young women. Quickly labeled as Roxy Girls, young beach lovers were suddenly allowed to simply experience the joy of the waves. High performance was not required to gain acceptance in the culture. In fact, the movement created its own cultural rituals. The most important was exhibiting a carefree attitude with playful intensity. From both a social and commercial standpoint, offering inclusiveness as an essential component of surf lifestyle was pure genius. Have I been blind? Have I been hypnotized, mesmerized by what my eyes have found? Natalie Merchant asked as she stalked the streets of New York, shooting photographs with a Leica M3, writing the song lyrics to Carnival, her top 10 Billboard hit in the summer of 1995. The world may not have been looking, but they could no longer be blind. By the mid-90s, the increased presence of women in the lineup was finally undeniable. In Southern California alone, the number of longboards fast approached a 50-50 ratio to shortboards, and the increasing number of women in the lineup helped tip the scale. Female-exclusive surf camps like Surf Diva in La Jolla and Las Olas in mainland Mexico flourished. Hot young board riders like Tanya Booth, a San Onofre State Park lifeguard's daughter, became a poster girl. Literally, the San Onofre Classic used her image for the event poster in 1996 and 2000. By the summer of 1995, spurred by a deluge of marketing dollars from an influx of new women's surfwear companies who followed Roxy into the marketplace, thousands of females boldly ignored the entrenched stigma that surfing was only for the guys and entered the lineup. Retail demand had grown strong enough for the world's first all-girls surf shop to open, Water Girl and Encinitas, and the trend would continue across the spectrum. As world champion shortboarder Lisa Anderson became the first woman on the cover of Surfer magazine in over 15 years, and Madeleine Albright made history as America's first female Secretary of State, the longboard groundswell was as historic as anything else that was happening in women's surfing, or perhaps in national politics. Up and down the West Coast, the trend was expanding. Younger girls living inland of Malibu, including Cassia Medor and Ashley Lloyd, noticed the trend and followed suit. These two women would become major figures in the longboard and general surfing culture in decades to come. But in the late 90s, they were eager teenagers getting their first taste of surfing's unmitigated joy. No Cruel Summer. For Cassia Medor, that taste came in summer of 1997, when she was 15 and her parents started dropping her off at First Point Malibu. While the shortboard revolution of the 70s and the pro tour of the 80s had continued to grow, the world-famous right-peeling break had returned to its classic roots. As those who were longtime students knew, First Point was practically engineered for longboarding. Medor immediately became captivated, quickly mastering the fundamentals and developing her own style. She was so distinctive, contended Joel Tudor, a two-time world longboard champion. No one could miss her performances. Joining the Malibu Surf Club, she traveled to competitions up and down the coast. The Ace of Base trio may have had a huge 1998 radio hit singing about summer's oppressive heat and the misery of romance, but Medor and her companions had no cruel summer. For them, it was more like All I Want to Do Is Have Some Fun by Sheryl Crow. Over the next few years, Mador surfed nearly every day from dawn till dusk. Wave riding became no ordinary love. Her first invitation to an international surf competition came from the Rabbit Kakai 1999 Longboard Classic in Costa Rica. Her parents didn't have the money to send her, so Mador bought candy at Smart and Final discount grocers and sold it to her classmates at markup. She made $1,500, enough for the ticket to Costa Rica. Using the same tactic, she covered her own travel expenses to a competition in Noosa, Australia, where she caught the eye of renowned longboard shaper Donald Takayama. Takayama was in the water with Jeff Hackman, co-founder of Quicksilver. Takayama offered to shape boards for Mador. Hackman helped secure her sponsorship from Roxy. Within a few short months, Mador was on a surf adventure vessel in the Indian Ocean, exploring the Maldives island chain. She was skipping her senior prom, but turning heads with her frenetic footwork. Implementing a wildly free-spirited and original style, Mador would grip the nose with her toes and suspend herself in full trim, spin around and cross-step backward to reposition the board for additional feats of gravity. These elegant performances earned her media attention and bolstered the appeal of longboards for women. Cassie was like a magnet, fellow Malibu Girls crew member Julie Cox remembered. She had such a style. She could make you laugh and at the same time be very entrepreneurial. Her timing seemed ideal. Supported by vibrant longboard magazine, heightened general media coverage, and a boom in women's surf-specific fashions, longboarding's rekindled popularity accelerated the acceptance of women's surfing as a whole. To the mass of women competing on longboards across the globe, all that was missing now was an event worthy of being called a world contest. Hank Raymond, organizer of the Costa Rica Longboard Classic, stepped in to fill that long-standing void. His self-proclaimed world title event, the Toes on the Nose Women's World Longboard Championship, was the first women's longboard world championship since the shortboard revolution of the late 60s. Held annually in Costa Rica from 1999 to 2003, in conjunction with the Rabbit Kakai Classic, the Women's World Longboard Championship, WWLC, became the world's longest-running women's-only surf competition to date. Acceptance and opportunity encouraged a new wave of women into the professional career path, but for many, it would come with a price. Beauty is a beast. As market demand created a commercial boom, opportunities expanded for women with the right characteristics. But the results of this new stardom had its dark side. Unlike the men, females were not judged strictly on their athletics. They were required to have other qualities as well. It was a confusing and sometimes debilitating juxtaposition. A few years before Mador's rise, Veronica Kay also joined the Roxy team as both a competitor and model. Bright and effervescent, she was 14 at the time. My weight went up and down between focusing on surfing and modeling, Kay remembered. I would have a model body and be really skinny. Then I'd try to paddle out and be like, oh my God, I'm not strong enough. Then you focus on being an athlete, but you're like, I don't look as good in a bathing suit. It messes with your head. That a graceful, talented, compellingly candid woman who became the 1997 National Scholastic Surfing Association champion at 17 should have insecurities about her appearance strong enough to mess with her head illustrates the added struggles women face compared to their male counterparts. No matter that Kay had traveled the world as a professional athlete and brand ambassador for the largest company in surfing and became a fashion editor for a Newport Beach magazine, the apprehension about looks was endemic among women in surfing. The worry was pervasive regardless of sexuality. Keala Kennelly, then a top 10 ranked shortboarder with a record-breaking resume in big waves, still felt compelled to conceal her sexuality during her brand-sponsored years on the Billabong team. I was definitely trying to femme it up, Kennelly divulged. For most brands, you need to be feminine and straight and pretty if you want to be sponsored. Tanya Booth, a beautiful stylist from a longtime San Onofre surfing family, was crushed when her sponsorship was not renewed. Alan Seymour, who had created the Roxy longboard events and had helped her obtain her patronage, saw the emotional damage. No matter how gorgeous you are or how well you surf, no matter how many other reasons the brand might have for cutting back on budget, he lamented, When a young, impressionable girl gets cut, she can take it to mean she isn't pretty enough. Another Roxy team member from the tweens decade, Julie Cox, remembered the pressure. I'm 5'10" and skinny, so I was the accepted stereotype. But I saw much more talented people not getting sponsorships, Cox recollected. There weren't that many brands supporting women. If you fit the Roxy mold and rode for their team, you were stoked. But if you didn't, you were out of luck. Cox, whose elegant style in and out of the water brought her many admirers, balanced the competing demands better than most. Conventional beauty was not the only thing, but it was often a big part of a long-term career with many of the surf labels. What was remarkable was how each of these women found a path to success by not giving up. Veronica Kay would move to New York, train with Danny Crooker, one of the most avant-garde yoga instructors in the tri-state area, and eventually become the only other instructor of her method, DCM, a fusion of hot yoga boot camp, CrossFit, and total body fitness. Kasia Mader would start her own brand, targeting a distinct set of consumers for women's surfwear, drafting a fresh blueprint for female pros struggling to earn a living. Julie Cox would create her own surfboard line, an innovative hybrid surf shop, part women's social club, part surf school, and part travel destination, serving a myriad of female needs. From Ocean Beach, California to Ocean City, New Jersey, pods of women surfers now filled the lineups. Young daughters of surf families entrenched in the lifestyle slipped into the mix. Jennifer Tracy, Kristen Moore, and Molly and Amanda Hulsizer all found their way around the breaks of San Onofre. The renewed enthusiasm for longboards in the first half of the 90s felt like a paradigm shift, but it was really a blast pattern, a series of eruptions, real progress, yet only partially representing the female side where the Roxy brand exploded. As surfing's cultural foundation itself splintered into divisions, longboard, big wave, professional competition, amateur rankings, and even stand-up paddling, the options expanded. Into this fractured landscape came a diverse array of events and new names who took on the challenge of expressing self-aware womanhood in very different ways. As the millennium clock crossed midnight, a new dawning began. Well, that is going to do it for this episode. I really hope you enjoyed today's reading from Jim Kempton's incredible book, Women on Waves, A Cultural History of Surfing, from ancient goddesses and Hawaiian queens to Malibu movie stars and millennial champions. What a great chapter. It was a great reminder that surfing's evolution isn't always a straight line. After decades of pushing performance, speed, and power on shortboards, we see in this chapter a return to something more fluid, something that feels more deeply connected to surfing's roots. By embracing longboards, these women reintroduced a way of surfing that values grace and style as much as progression. They showed that strength in surfing isn't only about force and being radical, but about control, creativity, and flow. There's so many more great stories in this book, so I hope that you're going to go out and pick up a copy for yourself. If you enjoyed this episode, it'd mean a lot to me if you shared this podcast with a friend who loves surfing, surf culture, or just a good story from the past. If you'd like to help support the podcast, you can visit buymeacoffee.com/The Surfer's Library. Your support helps cover the platform fees that keep the show going each month. Also, if you'd like to sponsor the podcast or have any story ideas or feedback for the podcast, please contact us on Instagram or at thesurferslibrary@gmail.com. Well, with all that said, I'd like to thank you for tuning in once again. And until next time, keep your toes on the nose, your stoke high, and always, always, always support your local surf shop. I'll see you in the lineup. Jim Kempton is a pioneering figure in the surf and action sports world. An author, editor, screenwriter, and historian whose work has appeared in leading surf publications, as well as major outlets like the New York Times and Time. He currently serves as executive director of the California Surf Museum and previously held top roles including editor and publisher of Surfer Magazine, group publisher at Transworld Publishing, and media director for Billabong. Earlier in his career, he worked at Surfboards Hawaii in Encinitas and traveled extensively during the 1970s era of surf exploration, helping introduce surfing to Europe and launching the influential Global Surf Report, which later became part of Surfer Magazine. An award-winning screenwriter and author, Kempton wrote Big Wave Guardians and The Shape of Things, the Dick Brewer story, both recognized at multiple film festivals, along with other surf-focused projects. He has authored 4 books, including Women on Waves, a history of women surfing that won the Southern California Book Festival Award for nonfiction, as well as First We Surf, Then We Eat, Surfing, the Manual, and the San Onofre Surfing Club. Born on Guam and raised in the South Pacific, he has surfed or lived in more than 30 countries and holds an MBA in International Business and a BA in Journalism, studying in England, Hawaii, and San Diego.